Neil's head over heels for the next. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Next up, round 3.
Before they were famous.
And reclaimed Acclaim.
All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, Dave. How are you?
I am wonderful, Neil. Are you feeling better now? Are you over your illness?
Yeah, we all sounded a bit snotty last week, didn't we?
Yeah.
Lee included, who was a wonderful guest.
Yes, he was.
Lots of nice feedback about just how laid back and chilled and fun Lee was to have on the show.
Yeah, Lee's a nice man. I always enjoy speaking to him. Yeah. Hello, Lee. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Lee and Thomas. Yeah, it was great. And Lee did show Thomas. He said the bit where we waved at Thomas and said hello, and it went down well. So
let's wave at Thomas again then.
Hi, Thomas. Is this going to be a segment every week, the wave at Thomas segment?
If we talk anymore, it'll have to be.
Yeah, I was a bit snotty last week, so I did very little in the way of retro. I rested up, didn't make any videos, did some admin, and now I've got lots of catching up to do this week. Never on top of it, but I will get right back into it. Planning on doing a fun episode with Richard about FPGA. So 5 years ago, I did an episode called Is FPGA the Future of Retro Gaming?
Yes. It
was essentially a D10 Mr. Stack review, but it explored why that was becoming such a popular thing.
It's a great episode. I remember it well. I bought a Mr. the same day I watched that because of the episode.
Yeah. It was interesting actually watching it back to refresh myself what I said in it, the prices of things then, and how much things like the D10 has increased from Intel. Anyway, things have moved on a lot since then in terms of what's available and in terms of what's coming on stream with things like the Multi-System 2 and the Tacky's one, the
Mr. Pi.
It's escaped me. Mr. Pi, and then his all-in-one one, which he's got on pre-order. Lots going on, and other add-ons that have appeared for the stack and this, that, and the other. But fundamentally, there's a question of why hasn't it progressed more than it has? If you look at, for example, a Pi 5 years ago, and then the Pi 5 and the additional power that brings with it, I think there's sometimes some confusion because it's not a direct comparison. You can't compare it to a Pi. You can't expect the kind of progress that you get from traditional systems. And why is that? And Richard's very well placed to answer those questions. So we're going to go into that.
Idea, even just saying why hasn't it progressed much? I mean, the progression in 5 years from what you thought would be possible. Now, what you thought was possible, what other people were telling you. So you're not to blame. It's now so much more has happened than what we ever thought was possible. I mean, it's exceeded all expectations.
In terms of the cause, a lot of progress, a lot of work, a lot of discoveries made to, take it further than we thought possible at the time.
Yeah.
But in terms of the hardware, a lot of the same hardware.
We're still at the stack, or we're still at the stack plus a breakout. Apart from Tacky stuff, Tacky's the only person to bring it forward. There's the Mars project, although that's gone quiet.
Yeah, and the Multi-System 2
of course.
is all in one. And we'll just skim over the Super Sega scam system, won't we?
That doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist. So anyway, let's not get too deep into that because we'll be making an episode. And just from that conversation, there's a lot to talk about. So that'll be really interesting to get into. Dave, have you done any retro things this week?
I've been playing an RPG. We said we would play, both said we'd play Disco Elysium. Remember, we were told to play it. It was this non-standard role-playing game, highly rated. I played it for a bit and then I stopped playing it because it was quite grim and it wasn't making me happy. It's almost like a point and click, I think, more than a role-playing game, and I wanted a role-playing game, so I kind of bounced off it for now. I'm surprised.
The subject matter was grim, was it?
Yeah. I mean, it starts off as about a murder. You're an alcoholic waking up with amnesia, and you're an absolute wreck of a human being. So I thought this is too close to home for me.
Sounds a bit Max Payne.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like I can't watch EastEnders. I can't watch Casualty if I'm having a tough week. I don't have the brain space for it. So I think I'd be the same playing a game like that at the moment. Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I've been doing. And then I went on to play Icewind Dale 2. There is a fan-made enhanced edition for it, so I'm playing that and enjoying that. That's I'm chopping up orcs and all the rest of it, but I'm not doing it with a frown in my face.
Nice. I've done a non-retro thing.
Oh yeah,
the tide lamp that I've been talking about. A friend of mine who I went to college with back in the 90s, Alex, we've been good friends ever since we met at college. And he's a bit of a tinkerer. And over the years, he invented a device that he put behind his headboard originally that links to his local tide times and changes according to what the tide's doing. And he managed to get some backing from Plymouth University to help turn that into an actual lamp, and then some funding from the UK government, some grants to really get it professionally turned into a lamp. And I've been sort of working alongside him more in a capacity of giving him encouragement and telling him how great it is and suggesting changes over the years. And then he invited me to come in and actually help him to launch the product officially. So, we went to a little expo on Sunday and showed off this lamp for the first time, and it went down extremely well. So if you're interested in that, just look for Tide Lamp. Yeah, tidelight.co.uk is the company, tidelight.co.uk. And that's going to be kickstarted next month. And as with anything I do, I'm hoping it will be a success, because that success will funnel into the museum, any share of that success. So it's not retro, but it could turn into helping retro. Save all of the retro things, Dave.
It's funny you mention that. In fact, there's one more thing you have to mention, Neil.
Go on, what have I forgotten?
What have you mentioned every week up till now?
Oh, yes, the bundle.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's been so much going on in the last week. Yeah. So a huge thank you to everyone for the bundle. I've been banging on about it for about 5 weeks. I think I've given myself PTSD from banging on about it so much. And you'll all be grateful that I'm shutting up about it now. But it was a huge success. £35,000 raised by everyone. So thank you so much. And hopefully, most importantly to me, you enjoyed the bundle and the contents of the bundle. I hope you got a lot out of it. We will, that 35,000, the first 25 was fund matched by a very kind sponsor. So we've actually got £60,000 minus taxes and platform fees, all sat in the account ready to all be spent on this project. It's not going anywhere else but into this garage project. And Wednesday this week, we hope to have our final plans sort of signed off by HEBA as to what we're going to do to their building. And then we can go for it. We can get everything ordered, and we can start converting the garage into our dream workshop, archive, and storage space and inventory space. Obviously, it'll all be documented on video. So very exciting times, and looking forward to it. And if you're local and you want to volunteer and you want to get involved, we'll be looking for all the help we can get in a kind of DIY SOS style over the summer. Get Nick Knowles down there. Stacey Solomon.
Fire a nail gun into your finger.
Annika Rice appearing with a helicopter to come and help us out.
Let's get on with the show, Neil.
Thank you, everyone. Let's get on with it.
In 1982, the most important UK micro was launched. Coming hot off the heels, remember the word heels, of the BBC Micro, the ZX Spectrum sold millions to people who would have never got their hands on a micro otherwise. I'm a little bit conflicted with the BBC Micro and the Specky for which is the most important, but I'm going to be a coward, and I'll say that the computer literacy project, which is what gave us a BBC Micro, but the computer literacy project was the most important thing, and the Spectrum was the result of that.
Yeah, I agree. I was about to say, what would have had a bigger impact, Dave? No BBC Micro or no ZX Spectrum?
The literacy project is what got everyone wanting a micro, and that's what they bought for their kids, the ZX Spectrum. It sold a lot more. A neater history would have been one where the Electron, instead of the Specky, became the one that sold loads of them, and would have the BBC in the classroom and the Elk in the homes. But that isn't what happened. The Spectrum launched in 1982, and it received two notable upgrades, only two notable upgrades. The first upgrade was available at lunch. At lunch?
At lunch?
Are you hungry, Neil? Is it lunchtime? The first upgrade was available at launch, and that took it from 16K to 48K, and 48K would become the standard for it. And the second upgrade was to take it to 128K and adding 3-channel sound. Now, there's lots of different models. There are other upgrades, even before Amstrad bought Sinclair and introduced the different +2 and then the +3 with integrated tape and then disc, and then loads of licensed and some unlicensed clones of it over the years throughout the world. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of the maybe different versions of the Spectrum that I have, but I want to hammer in that the upgrade path for it consisted of really 3 different models: the 16 kilobyte original one, the 48 kilobyte standard Spectrum, I guess, and then the 128K one. And that was the 3 models that games and so on were published for. One of those 3. As for what was the upgrade for the Spectrum, there's 2 contenders, the Sinclair QL and the SAM Coupe. And the QL was a business-focused machine, and it just didn't take off for games. And it wasn't Spectrum compatible. And the SAM Coupe was a third-party luxury Spectrum that launched as compatible with it. I mean, it broadly was compatible, but also with enough grunt to be able to do games that looked like 16-bit games.
You know, they should have made a QL compatible SAM. They could have called it the Sam Beckett.
Oh, well done.
Well
done, Neil.
Thank you.
Be able to do 16-bit light games. You would think of it as like the unsuccessful Amstrad Plus and GX range, or the successful PC Engine range, in that it was an 8-bit CPU, but there was more powerful, beefy sound and graphics with the hope of doing something that looked similar to what the Atari ST looked like at the time, or the Amiga looked like at the time. The SAM didn't launch until 1989, though, and I think that was too late for Specky fans. And I think that's probably why it failed. Had it managed to get off the blocks a few years earlier, then perhaps it would have been a natural upgrade for Spectrum owners. Don't lose your games, but open the door to something better. Trade in your rubber-keyed, dead flesh Spectrum and get something with a decent keyboard, disk drive up. You can possibly get a disk drive in the future. It can still play all your Spectrum games, but you can do much more with it. But where am I going with this? Well, for Spectrum fans in the 80s, they wanted to know what came next. And Sinclair didn't have the answer to what came next. For the vast majority of Spectrum fans, it would have been...
He did. It was a C5. That was his next big thing. Honestly, I think that was such a distraction. He took his eye off what was coming next for the Spectrum, didn't he?
Yeah. So what came next for people was an Atari ST, a Mega Drive, an Amiga, a PC, or maybe that was it. Maybe it was one and done and people didn't upgrade. They had the Spectrum, they had their time in the micro, and they went on their lives and they didn't stay in the hobby. So after 18 years of the Spectrum being discontinued, it was still being used, still had fans and still had people developing for it all over the world. And a variant of a Brazilian clone, TK95, which sounds like a stormtrooper designation, TK95 became the TB Blue. And in 2016, it was announced that the Spectrum Next was going to be based on this, and a new product kickstarted in 2017. It was successful. It got 3 times the initial goal, and then a second batch in 2020, sadly delayed by the pandemic, but I read all the updates, and the team behind it fought tooth and nail to get it out there, and they did get it out there. They did achieve it, and this time it got 7 times the funding goal. Now, Jim Bagley, who's been involved in the project for a long time, says, for me, the goal has been to encourage a new generation of bedroom coders. And I'd like to say that's happened, because I've been watching the list of software that's for the Next, and I wanted to start a whole new world of homebrew, and I haven't seen that happen in great numbers. There are a few, and I did back the second one, and I don't want to knock it, but I don't think there's been a whole new generation of bedroom coders from it. However, what you do get, though, is visually a Sinclair Spectrum. It is beautiful. It looks like a Spectrum. You can tell it's a Sinclair one, not an Amstrad one. It's compatible. It functions exactly like a Spectrum, but there's much more power if you want it. And if you remember last week's show, I talked about the three main problems of buying an old machine. That is the cost and the hassle of getting flash storage, video out, and power in. And this solves all three problems easily. So the next is by a long way the best Spectrum to own. Now they're doing a third Kickstarter, and I hope it's a huge success. I hope as many people as possible buy into it, because I want to see games for it. Thanks to Derek Flame Lily, your mate Derek, for letting us know. There's no info yet. It's only was tagged on as a final entry on the last Kickstarter update for people who had previously backed it. So there's no details at all other than they're getting ready to do a Kickstarter. And I should also say, I'm really impressed with how much effort they go into to keep people up to date. They send out Kickstarter updates, and it's what's happened in the world of the Spectrum next. And they don't have to do that. There's no reason for them to do that other than, I guess, customer service for the people that bought it already. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I too backed the second round of the next, so I was happy to support that. And that was also off the back of the first round, which they had a lot of trouble navigating sort of the lockdown era of supply chain issues and keeping people very well informed. And that's why they stand so well respected today, I think, because they did go to that effort and they continue to go to that effort to keep people informed and communicate well. It's when we talk about bedroom coders, it's hard to say that they didn't achieve what they hoped to, because there is new software for it. It is being made by bedroom coders, and I guess it depends what your expectation for that was. Are there tens, maybe hundreds of people coding for it and turning out games? Yes. Was there ever going to be thousands of new bedroom coders born out of a machine that over 40-year-olds are nostalgic for? Highly unlikely, but I think it's done damn well considering. And you can leave the other stuff to Scratch or Python or whatever else the kids, have tutors and access to help them with that stuff. But I think if you think about all the new retro systems that have come out in recent years, it's got a pretty strong community, and it's nice to see what's coming out of it. So, it's all about expectations, I think. And there are fantastic things like Mike Daly's C-Spect, which is it's an emulator first and foremost for the Next, so you can try out the Next without the hardware.
It's not an emulator for the Next; it's an emulator of the Next.
It's an emulator of the Next with the development, with the focus on it being a development tool. So really great for creating games. And there's Next cores for your FPGA systems as well. So there's lots of ways to access it. And I think what we see coming out of the community is exciting. And yeah, as I say, I think of all the retro platforms, the Next seems to be the most polished, the most, the one with the best communication, nice team around it. And yeah, it's not a huge community, but I think it's damn good as they could have hoped for, really. It's not a community that we're deeply ingrained in, Dave.
No.
We're not following it day in, day out, what's going on. We're just seeing that final output with the games that are published, but no doubt there's a hell of a lot more going on if we were to be following it closely.
We're spread thin in retro, I guess, and for me, I'm interested in so many different things that it's just whatever shiny object catches my interest, I go chasing after at that point, because for so many other people in retro, they're interested in one little facet of it, but not me. I've got a passing interest in everything. I'm a jack of all trades and master of none, so I was impressed by it. I mean, it's not that expensive either for what you're actually getting. It's good value. There's the Mega 65, I think, which was miles more expensive. That's the one that's the white C64C with a built-in disk drive.
Oh, yeah.
Way more expensive. This is much cheaper. So, yeah, if you at all want to have a Spectrum without any problems, then I would recommend that you back this. And
it also ties in well with what we so often talk about with excessive choice. And normally we talk about that in the context of all the ROMs that are available to you. well, actually, sometimes it's nice to just go, right, this is the system. This is the system I'm going to focus on. It's a ZX Spectrum Next. It's not a Mister with every single machine I could ever think of on here. There's a lot to be said for that, I think.
And I did want to include another submission, this one from Chromie, about Head Over Heels. Now, Head Over the Heels is one of the best loved 8-bit games. It's a Z80 masterpiece. It's a puzzle game where you play two different characters, one called Head and one called Heels. They're secret agents. And it's a 2.5D presented isometric platform game with lots and lots of individual rooms. I think it's 300 individual rooms, maybe.
Would you call it a platform game? Would you call it a puzzler? A platform puzzle game?
It's a puzzle game. It is a puzzle game, but with platforms. And you navigate this as one of the two of them, trying to solve puzzles. They have slightly different abilities. One's faster, one can shoot donuts, and one can jump longer. Or you can combine them, and you can combine them either to do different things for one puzzle and each of them individually, or you can combine them together into one distinct unit to do things. And it's a really accessible game because it doesn't rely so much on your hand-eye coordination and repeating things until you get it wrong. You just have to sit and work out how to do it. So it's a really popular game. Even on the PCW, it was popular, Neil. On the CPC as well, but of course on its home, the Spectrum. So a new version of this was made for the Spectrum Next, an upgraded version. And if you backed the Kickstarter too, it became a stretch goal for it. And the stretch goal was achieved, so everyone that bought it got Head Over Heels. But they've now released a version on Steam. So they've released a version on Steam so that if you've got a PC, you can play Head Over Heels Deluxe with chickens. It's an enhanced version of it, but it's still the same basic gameplay, still the same classic gameplay. But I'm not quite sure how I feel about it because I kind of want it to be the USP of the Next. Say that if you want to play Head Over Heels Deluxe, you need to do it on a Next, either the real machine or on a core on your Mister, whatever. What do you think, Neil?
Dave, I think the argument here is that if you can sell more of it on any platform, I presume it's not free on Steam, is it? It's
about a tenner.
About a tenner. That can help to fund more development on the Next itself. So, it'd be a bit like saying, I've made some music, but I'm only going to release it on vinyl record. You're not going to get it on streaming platforms or CD. So that, get it out however you can so that it can fund even more creativity. I say, get it out there. Yeah.
Fair enough.
And even if it was just on the Next, it wouldn't take much to install C-Spec or, your core on a FPGA, like you say, and try it out that way. So, what's the point? Let's get it out there. Do you know what? I'm going to go and buy it right now, Dave.
Are you?
Load up Steam and I'm going to buy it right now.
Kickstarter details are not out yet, as I said. We will keep you updated. Head Over Heels is updated. It is out now. So Duncan will put a link in the show notes for Head Over Heels on Steam if you'd like to play it and buy it now. Send them your money. I think there's 25% off just now, Neil.
A typical reflection of modern gaming. Steam is now updating.
Yeah, so I am really keen to see this Kickstarter 3 for the Spectrum Next, and hoping a whole new generation of people get on the platform, and hoping it tips over to the point where there's lots of development on it. I want to see a new Ultima game on the Next, Neil.
You've got the Brinley Witch Chronicles, haven't you? That's on the C64, but maybe it could get a port over. That'd be quite nice. Find the Hooter Gun. Yeah, there's a 4-page manual with Head Over Heels in PDF form, and the game is installed. Right, I've got Head Over Heels.
Fantastic.
Back to the show.
We are sponsored this week, thank you very much, by PCB Way. Who are PCB Way, Neil?
PCB Way at PCBWay.com is the only way to PCB. The PCB Way. Have it your way with PCB Way.
Every little helps.
Yeah, so they make PCBs and they do 3D printing and
CNC milling.
CNC milling. They have a shared project section. And the thing I found in that last week was, what was I looking for? Oh, the Sega Neptune board. So the never released 32X/Sega Mega Drive console that Sega were planning to release was recreated by the mighty Kosam. And it's available in the shared project section at PCBWay.com, as well as the case. So you can get a beautiful looking case and the PCB, and you can recreate the Neptune.
Just get the toner chips and then order it on there, and you're fine.
Yeah. Da-da-da-da-da. PCBWay.com.
Thank you, PCBWay. Da-da-da-da-da. Is that the new jingle? PCBWay.com.
It's time for a list, because we love a list, and this week it's one submitted by a man who would be high up on our list for the most submissions. It's Paul Pajako6502. Hello, Paul. He links us to an article on xda-developers.com about 5 early gaming prototypes that shaped gaming. Author Benjamin Zeman says, gaming's history is full of unexpected turns. Before consoles like the PlayStation, NES, or Genesis became cultural landmarks, they started as rough prototypes, unpolished hardware built to test ideas and push the limits of what's possible at the time. Just like you, Dave, a rough prototype. And then he goes on to show us some of those important machines. So let's go through them and have a bit of a history lesson. The first, many will be familiar with, of course.
Before you say anything, Neil.
Yes, Dave.
I'm going to ask you, once you've gone through all 5, the one prototype that wasn't there that I would like to be there, the most interesting thing I can think of.
Okay,
I'll tell you, once you've got to the end, I'll ask you what it is. Give you time to think about it.
I think, okay. The first is Ralph Baer's brown box for the Magnavox, developed in 1968. Proof, if it was ever needed, that an injection molded case is not needed to break new ground. The plain wooden box housed the first real attempt to turn a consumer television into an interactive device. The idea for Ralph went back all the way to 1951 when he was a TV engineer, and he wanted to find a way to make TVs less of a passive experience, and this work culminated in the Magnavox Odyssey, released in 1972, the world's first commercially available games console. It did okay. It wasn't a roaring success, but it wasn't a failure either. And what he certainly did well out of was the patents in developing such a system first. So that's the brown box. Next, we have the Atari Video System X. This was a monstrous-looking console which was supposed to follow up the VCS, or 2600, that was later renamed to. And while we can guess what kind of tech might have been inside, because they had the 400 and the 800 micros around at the time, and then we got the 5200. The 5200 is what it would go on to become. Key features were cut out, such as backward compatibility with the 2600. But the coolest thing about the VSX prototype is really the looks. Atari took inspiration from high-end Bang & Olufsen stereos of the time. And you can see how that VSX shape took that inspiration and how it would then evolve into the final form of the 5200. It's quite the wedge. It's perhaps the wedgiest of all wedges that I've seen. It doesn't have a keyboard on it, but it's a wedge and a half. A handful of these VSX prototypes still exist, and if you're looking this one up, also have a look at the 3200 prototype as well, because that's a fun-looking one. Shades of the what was the console with like the pastel-coloured lozenges on it from Atari?
The XGS.
Yeah. So 3200 looks a lot like that. I don't know if that's what it went on to become. I need to look into it, but I just saw it when I was looking at the VSX, and it looked quite nice. Representing handhelds is the Sega Genesis Venus, which would eventually become the Sega Nomad. So this is when Sega was using their planetary code names. A nomad being someone who has no permanent place of residence, so I guess they are portable, like the Sega Nomad, but they also had no real home. The article isn't really specific on why this one was defining, or if anything was cut out from the original design. It did go on to be released as a Nomad. It did support original Mega Drive or Genesis cartridges. It was power hungry, and the article seems to hinge on it being It hinges on the fact that it has AV outputs, so it kind of blends portable with home gaming. You could plug it into your big telly and play it like a regular Mega Drive. And it goes on to cite that it is an inspiration for the Nintendo Switch of the modern day. Bit of a stretch, but I kind of get it, Dave.
I think it was only ever brought out to make Atari Lynx owners feel better about battery usage. It could be worse.
Now, have you ever heard of the Nintendo Advanced Video System, or AVS?
Nope.
Yeah, I love the look of this one. So in the article, it says this was an attempt to kind of take the Famicom from Japan and make it for Western audiences.
So the Famicom is the family computer.
That's right, yeah. So the result of that work was the grey NES box that we know and love. So that did happen, and it had that shades of a VHS player, a top-loading VHS player about it. But Lance Barr designed a fully fledged microcomputer in 1984, which had that same grey and red styling that we saw, but it included a keyboard, a cassette player, and a joystick. Advertising shows it as a machine for programming games on, learning to play piano on, and of course gaming. And I think it could have perhaps taken on the Commodore 64 pretty well. I know the NES did take it on well, but, in micro form, I think it could have matched the price and it could have done well. And it would probably have avoided some of the traps that the Coleco Adam fell into with Nintendo steering it. But we never got it. There was a Famicom Family Basic system, which was a keyboard that you could plug in with a red and gold style of the original Famicom. And in the modern day, you could kind of recreate it if you seek out those 8-bit DOE keyboards for your PC with the same NES styling. But never came into being. And then the final prototype on the list, it's well known, of course. It's the Nintendo PlayStation, designed to play both Super Nintendo cartridges and CD-based games. And it is described in the article as gaming's greatest what-if console. It went on to sell for $360,000 at auction. Imagine finding that in your loft. With the help of, I think it was Ben Heck along the way, wasn't it? He got it working again. The whole article is a nice reminder of the risk-taking, the crazy thinking that developers used to try to get a competitive advantage, and perhaps the things that happen when engineers get a little bit too much slack to experiment with before the bean counters rein them back in again. I always like to see that. Dave, you asked me to guess your prototype. Do you want me to have a guess now?
Go and guess.
I'm going to go with the Konix multi-system.
I thought you might say that after I asked the question. That's not what I was thinking of. I was thinking of the Atari Falcon Microbox, which was them taking the successor to the Atari ST line, reducing it down to a mini PC without a keyboard that you plug in that stood up on your desk. And it did end up somewhere, Neil, of course. Where did it end up?
The PlayStation 2.
That's right.
Yeah.
The PlayStation 2 used the design of the Microbox. I'll give Duncan the image. To make the PlayStation 2. Incredible. Anyway, on to these things here. I really enjoyed this. I quite like looking at the 5 of these and judging which ones I think went in the right direction and which ones went in the wrong direction. And I think the only one that I really would disagree with the direction they went is the Atari System X. Because I really like how those LEDs look. It looks so futuristic and classy. And why couldn't they have kept the LEDs on it?
Well, are you looking at the silver one? Because is that the System X or is that the Bang & Olufsen that inspired it in that article? I think. Well,
source Atari IO forum, it says there.
Yeah.
And it says load on it and level. So I don't know.
That's probably audio level. I think that might be the B&O system that inspired it.
Right, okay. Well,
yeah, there are
I like the LEDs in it.
It's a nice looking thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
everything should look like that.
We've seen LEDs come back. If you look at the Evercade systems, they've got LEDs at the front, all sorts of things are there. So they could have had RGB early.
Richard at Heba, if you want to know something that annoys him, it's a PCB without an LED on it, so he can't tell if it's turned on when it's powered on without cases and lights attached to it.
Why wouldn't you put just a single LED in it, just so you can find out? I mean, there's no cost involved. It saves you a lot of hassle. I can't tell if it's getting power or not. Let me get a multimeter, or look, the green LEDs on.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm with him on that.
I'd never even heard of the Mega Drive Nomad thing. So
you not heard of the Nomad? No. I don't think it was sold in our region, but it sort of floats about.
I know that there's a Creative Nomad. So the Creative Nomad was an MP3 player. And I wonder if I've heard Nomad being talked about and just assumed it was that. I don't know. Surprised I don't know about it. It's US only, of course, and it's so clearly what Nintendo did with the Switch. Here is your literally a Genesis, because it was US only, literally a Genesis in your hand that plays Genesis games. And when you get home after being at school on the bus, you can plug it into your TV and you've got your Genesis. You can take it with you to your gran's at the weekend. You've got your Genesis there. You can plug it into her telly. I can see the appeal of it, and that's what a Switch is.
All very exciting, but the PlayStation had come out. It was
I
1995.
know. I mean, it was far too late for it, yeah. On to the Nintendo one, which I think is the most interesting one. The AVS would have been a failure, I think, as they were planning it. So they did the right thing. What they did with it was simplify it and said, look, let's make a single unit as cheap as we can, the NES, and make it really simple for people. You plug the gamepad on the front, you plug the TV in the back, the power in, and you stick your cartridge in, and you're done. And that's all you need. So I understand why they did that. But I think they could have made a success by having 3 different products. They could have had the NES, they could have had the home computer upgrade for it, and they could have had the NES Micro. So you could have the NES, then you could have bought a package with what you needed to make it into a Micro, the keyboard, etc. And finally, you could have bought a wedge-based system, which was the NES, with that built in for slightly less than the cost of the 2 combined.
I think they would have had as much chance of making that a success as, if not more, as selling the NES with a Rob robot in a bag.
Yeah.
They were prepared to try these things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think that would have succeeded because the micro market, as we know, is smaller than the cartridge-based console market. So they didn't need to sell as many of that. They could have sold all the basic ones they wanted and then have the upgrades for next Christmas kind of thing. So they could have done that. But the one reason why they couldn't do it is because they didn't know how successful the NES would be. You couldn't have predicted how successful it would be. It's really easy for me to sit here and say, with all the success the NES had, it could have done that at launch. And you would need to have done it at launch. If you do it 2 or 3 years later, it's too late. They would need to know in advance at launch, this is going to be an absolute barnstormer. It's going to sell gangbusters. It's going to be absolutely everywhere, like what it was in America. The NES was so prolific there. They didn't know in advance, so that's why they couldn't have done it.
It's also interesting if you flip it around to think that Nintendo were thinking about doing that in 1984. They developed it to, almost a standard they could release it. If you flip it around, Commodore, December 1990, thought, actually, maybe we should make the Commodore 64 into a console with the GS and released it, and you would have gone into 1991 with a GS for Christmas. Are you keeping up with the Commodore?
The least interesting one, though, is the Nintendo PlayStation, but that's just because I already knew about it. It's an interesting story, of course, but I already knew about that one. The other ones I didn't know much about at all, if anything. So I really enjoyed this. Thank you, Bajako.
Yeah, thank you, Bajako. It was an interesting article, and I'd like to see a follow-up because, just those 5 were super interesting. There was an interview submitted about the book Curious Video Games with the author Lewis Packwood, who did a talk in the cave last year. A wonderful talk. And of course, Curious Video Games is absolutely jam-packed with these kinds of systems. So that's a source of more information if you like this kind of article. Do go and check it out. The link to the story, as with everything we discuss, is in the show notes. And make our subreddit your source of retro news, reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro. Da 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 da.
We have 3 new patrons this week, Neil.
Wonderful.
3 of them.
Welcome.
Yeah, so thank you to Bruce, thank you to James, and thank you to TechMad.
Thank you very much for supporting us. Appreciate that.
If you'd like to join the Twirler army, become an official Twirler, then go to...
patreon.com/This Week in Retro.
Yeah, thank you very much, patrons. Nothing else in housekeeping this week.
Oh, you've kept house well this week. I can't even see any boxes stacked behind you this week, Dave. So you have been doing some good housekeeping. Well done. Well done to Dot and Johnny for doing that.
on to, we're recording a little bit later in the day, so you won't see Dot and Johnny today because they like to nap in the early afternoon. So they're both creating Zeds at the moment. On to briefs, and first up is a submission from Manx Nick titled Help for Old Gamers with Tired Eyes. And it's an interesting thing I've come across before, and it's a cartridge adapter for not the adapter itself, but the technology it uses. It's a cartridge adapter for the SNES that takes Game Boy carts, and I already knew about what it does from my RGB 30 handheld. It cleverly maps the shades of green to different colours. And in fact, some of them are preset based on the games, and it makes Game Boy games, which are monochrome, almost kind of colour, and it makes it much easier to use them. In fact, later game carts had colour info in them to help it do it.
Oh, cool. This was before the Game Boy Color.
Yeah. It makes playing Game Boy games nicer if you're doing it on a SNES or if you're doing it in modern times on an emulator. I'm sure most emulators for the Game Boy will have this on it. So you can see how things could look a little bit better, just easier on your eyes than that monotone.
I wonder if some of those games that had that colour information were aware that the Game Boy Color was coming down the line and they wanted to kind of make it compatible or ready to re-release. I don't know. Anyway,
I don't know. There was even little logos on the game packages for ones that supported it.
Antiques for Geeks submits a Guardian article titled Typewriters, Stinky Carpets and Crazy Press Strips, what it was like working on video game mags in the 1980s. And just to tie in with that, in the last couple of weeks, Julian Jazz Rignall has also released his book, The Games of a Lifetime, over at bitmapbooks.com. Of course, Julian, a prolific writer in our favourite magazines in the 80s and beyond. So check that out.
Pajako tells us about a neat upgrade for the Raspberry Pi 5. It can now output interlaced VGA and RGB to CRT displays. So that means that if you're using the Raspberry Pi, you can use it better without having a little dongle out the back from the RGB port, the HDMI port. You can now use it better on your CRTs for emulation.
Billy Bob Hobnob tells us that Atari have announced iRebel, a Jeff Minter game jam. So check out the link where you can go and submit your own games for Atari's consideration, I guess. I don't know what the prize is, whether they'll publish it, but why not get noticed by Atari? You've only got until the 18th of April to submit your jam.
Thank you, Billy Bob Hobnob. What an absolutely wonderful name to say out. And we've had to do a few cuts here where Neil got something slightly misunderstood. And there could be a Billy Bob Hobnob, which is about a minute solid of me and Neil saying it.
Billy Bob Hobnob.
Billy Bob Hobnob. Billy Bob Hobnob. There's an interesting post from Velimir Ikalovich talking about Eastern European gaming experience in Soviet times. So we touched on this many episodes back. We only touched on it once, and he shared his experience with us. He starts off by saying, if you're not Slavic speaking, don't even try to pronounce his name. I tried to pronounce it. I'm sorry. I hope I got it partially right, at least, Velimir, but maybe someone will correct me.
DJ Chris Fury links to a video from Seb's Place that says that Mastertronic scammed him. This is a video all about the early releases from the Mastertronic range and their dubious quality. And thank you also to Seb for the mention in that video.
Pajako links a time extension article where the makers of the Sharp X68K Mini are wondering if there's a market for this Mini outside of Japan. Is there, Neil? I think there is.
Yes, all day
Lots
long.
of people want those, and the idea of getting a real 68K, never happening.
I think they've made up their mind. I think this is just the start of their marketing, and we're going to
fishing.
See this happen.
Yeah. There's loads more on the subreddit. Go and have a crafty log while you're reading through it. Neil, if I was to tell you this story is about an Activision offshoot from the 80s that was super popular in the 90s, I think you would say Acclaim. Like Activision and Accolade, the name was chosen to be ahead of Atari in an alphabetic listing. There's a family tree that you can follow to get from Atari to Acclaim and Activision and Accolade.
It's up there in the phone book, isn't it? At the top of the phone book.
Yeah.
My favorite might be Overflow, and that's Overflow spelled with a 0. It's a Japanese video game company from around 97. Pretty good. And anything with 2K or 3D in there will kind of get you up there. 3D Worlds or 3D Realms even. I'm not sure the Yellow Pages is quite as important anymore as it used to be when choosing a name. So it's more, these days, it's more about domain availability, isn't it? Can you get the website?
Acclaim started out on the NES and they spread it onto other console platforms, porting other games, but mostly producing licensed games of licensed properties, movie tie-ins type things, of, shall we say, mixed quality, churning out loads of them. And it seems the quality did pick up through the 90s, and it seems their purple patch was at the end of the 90s and into the early 00s, where most of their highly rated games on Moby Games sit. Sadly, though, that's still mixed in with loads of really pretty poorly rated games. It seems Acclaim were happy to slap their logo on some real rubbish. They bought up a few studios and eventually in 2004 went bankrupt, and the assets, including the IP and branding, etc., were sold on. Before then, though, the most famous Acclaim title I can think of is Mortal Kombat. They also did Turok and lots of wrestling games, as well as baseball and other sports. To be honest, that's stuff I'd never go read. I don't really do sports games. They also did a bit of driving too. The Burnout series was theirs as well. Since they went bankrupt, though, there's been 2 failed restarts of Acclaim in 2006 and then again in 2016. And it looks like 10 years or so seems to be right, because it's happening again in 2025. Now fronted by wrestling's Jeff Jarrett. Now, I don't know wrestling. Neil, do you know Jeff Jarrett?
No, don't know Jeff Jarrett, sorry.
No, I looked him up and he wears some really awful outfits for his wrestling. Really awful outfits.
So for those who don't know, I've been working my way through WrestleMania on Netflix, and I think I'm up to about 1994, I think, and it's pretty dire at this point.
Is it?
I'm waiting for the Attitude Era to kick in. It might be a little bit later than that, because The Rock has just appeared, but he's called Rocky something, and he appears with his dad.
Right.
But he's
Can
not
you
The
smell
Rock
what he's cooking?
yet. He's not even cooking. He hasn't had his cookery lessons yet. It's that fresh.
Fronted by Jeff Jarrett, they're coming back, and maybe we'll see those 3 franchises come back. You know, Neil, Mortal Kombat, Burnout, and Turok. We've not seen those in years. Or maybe we'll see licensed wrestling games reappear. And of course, I'm not stupid. You can see where I'm going, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, Acclaim published lots. I prefer to talk about Accolade because I love their back catalogue, but Acclaim published lots. The Simpsons, Bart versus the Space Mutants, Alien 3 in some regions. They published Rise of the Robots in some regions. Porky Pig's Haunted Holiday, WWF In Your House, Jeremy McGrath's Supercross 98, South Park Chef's Love Shack, and Mary-Kate and Ashley Pocket Planner, to name just a few off the top of my head, Dave.
That's right.
Yeah. And the Powerpuff Girls, Relish Rampage, Pickled Edition.
Well, how could we miss that out? All of those franchises, though, were either sold off when the company went bankrupt in 2004, or they didn't own them and they'd only licensed the rights to make them for a game. So Mortal Kombat, Burnout, and Turok have continued after they went bankrupt in 2004. I'm not stupid. I knew these games had continued. So they're not going to bring those back because they don't own the IP. The new Acclaim company just owns the logo and the name and the right to publish games under it, but they don't own any of the rights to the IP unless they now go out and buy it separately. So we're not going to see a new Mortal Kombat, Burnout, or Turok games from them. And we're going to see instead what their goal is to publish new indie games. And it says, in articles I read about them, it says, and maybe buy old bold IP, although I can't find a quote from the new Acclaim saying they're going to buy old IP. That's just a speculation. So I think as it stands, it leaves them just hoping to sift through the massive waves of indie games. And sadly, there are too many indie games, and the vast majority of them lose money, and slap the Acclaim logo on and hope that console gamers from the 90s see the appeal in it. And if we're going back to the old Acclaim, then that's definitely not a seal of quality. They sold a whole lot of slop back in the 90s, you wouldn't go into a shop. It wouldn't be like Microprose or FTL. You wouldn't go into a shop and see the logo and think, I want to buy that game. You would see Acclaim and it would be like US Gold. So maybe we'll see them bring back their stunt marketing, though. They paid people to name their kid Turok, and they offer to pay speeding fines to promote Burnout 2. So maybe we'll see some stunt marketing coming back. What do you think, Neil?
It's interesting to see how these old brands are being used. Atari, of course, have had their name used and abused for years. Go on, Dave.
Atari are maybe the slight exception here in that Atari are publishing new indie games of quality.
They're
actually
now
doing it right. Yeah, finally.
Took them a
after
while to
doing
get
casinos and crypto and all the rest of it.
there. Yeah. Although they still do the odd whiskey decanter and glasses, but
Oh, yeah.
that's acceptable. So long as you're doing the core stuff, you're getting the games out there, have some fun around it, but get your core
Barbecue
sorted
sauce.
first. Yeah, it's not barbecue sauces and the occasional games. It's the other way around. Anyway, our current approach with Mastertronic, I guess, is if we don't release anything, then it can't be bad.
Yeah, good idea, Neil. Perfect record.
And, Acclaim, I don't think anyone will have high expectations for Acclaim, let's be honest. I did have an interesting conversation with Bill Steely last week, the founder of Microprose, and we got onto how he played a small part in the new Microprose, because that popped up again about 5 years ago. He was kind of there in a sort of an advisory role. It wasn't him that refounded this. And then he seemed to step back altogether not too long after that. And we didn't get into if he disagreed with the approach the new Microprose was taking.
Maybe he wouldn't have told you that anyway.
Yeah, we were running out of time at that point. I didn't want to push him too hard. Reading between the lines, it didn't sound like he was entirely happy with the direction it was going in. And it must be hard for people like him, for people that worked so hard to establish these companies in the first place, to get the reputation attached to names like Microprose and Acclaim and Accolade and Atari. The people who tried so hard, it must be difficult for them to look at those names being used poorly. So, yeah, try to treat them with respect, please.
Microprose are... they had an incredible reputation. You would see a game from Microprose and you'd look at it because it's from Microprose. SSI, there's a few other, Bullfrog, Origin, there's a few other places like that, and Acclaim I just don't think was up there, unless you're into wrestling. And I think if you were into playing wrestling games in the 90s, and maybe this is where we'd need Aaron to help us here from the Amigos, maybe Acclaim is what Microprose was to us, Acclaim is for wrestling fans in the 90s. Maybe that's the case. Jeff Jarrett's come back on. He is a wrestling guy, so maybe they're going to go wrestling. Maybe they think they can license wrestling games. I don't know.
It's still real to me, damn it.
Did you know, though, Neil, that Microprose have a big box game in Kickstarter?
No.
Microprose have got Task Force Admiral.
Hang on, why are they kickstarting? They've been releasing games left, right, and centre. Why are they kickstarting this one specifically?
Digital and physical editions available. The Kickstarter goal has been exceeded. It's now at 10 times what the goal was.
Ooh.
For some reason, it's listed in Australian dollars. Don't know why. Maybe that's just an error with the link.
The new
I followed.
Microprose is based in Australia.
Is it?
That's
Okay,
right,
there we go.
Yeah.
So you can buy the big box games for about £60 plus shipping, I imagine. So £60 for a brand new big box Microprose game. I guess that's in line with what the pricing was. So there you go.
Yeah, that's done very well, actually. I'm pleased for them. I didn't know that existed, and it looks like big box game with all the feelies. There's lots of tiers you can back, including the Seaman tier, because it is a Task Force Admiral game. So what tier will you be backing?
I won't be backing it. It's not my type of game. It looks like a serious version of Carrier Command.
Yeah.
Good luck to them, though. Good luck to them.
Yeah.
Do it with a more kind of strategy game, Master of Magic, or that kind of thing, and I'll back it.
B-17. I'm still waiting for that B-17 VR. Come on. Let's have that, please.
Acclaim are back, but it seems... I don't know if they were missed, and will it mount to anything? I don't know. It just seems like a little bit of a cynical attempt to slap an old logo on some new stuff and hope it sells them. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're going to see stuff coming back. And maybe if you are a wrestling fan from the 90s, maybe you can put in the comments why I'm wrong and why they are a big name. I don't know. Maybe if you've got a lot of nostalgia for Acclaim, then tell me in the comments why I'm wrong.
Time now for our community question of the week. And it was a nice short one last week, which was, what's the best thing you've ever found bundled with a game? And I think we should ban our top answer.
Yes.
Darth
Offended.
Lovejoy.
Offended.
Where are my admin tools? How do I delete this? He says, I remember finding a dishcloth in this little game that's nobody's heard of called Ultima. That thing kept my dishes clean for weeks.
If you've ever used your Ultima cloth map to clean the dishes, then you can get in the bin.
You've broken all of the virtues just by doing that.
Lord Borak, hello Lord Borak, says Ninja Star and Headband with Last Ninja. Had it back in the day, soon got lost. A Ninja Star in a game?
I've got it. It is a rubber Ninja Star.
Right, I was going to say that sounds a bit of a risk.
Yeah. Imaginary Swing 8606 says the absolute best thing ever bundled with a game would have to be the audio cassettes that came with the computer versions of Outrun and 720 Degrees. Those tapes got played constantly when I was younger. And Tungsten Orchid says he remembers getting Relax in the game Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Fantastic.
Lee ZZ, which I think might be Lee from last week.
Looks like it.
He says, maybe it's not, and he's the only person in the world to say this. He says, lens lock. I felt like a safecracker holding that against the screen and peering into the digital oblivion trying to make out the code. Meanwhile, everyone else said, I paid for the game, why can't I play it?
It's Me Thyroid says, supposedly Friday the 13th came with blood capsules. I've not heard of that before, but you wouldn't want them to break in the packet. I'll put a submission of my own. I've got a game called Sideshow for the Amiga. It's still got its 30-year-old packet of popcorn in there that came with it.
You see,
it did leak. There's ooze on the box, but I've re-shrink wrapped it. So it's back in there again.
Fiskett has one that's incredible. He went to Game to buy Civilization 2, and he ended up buying 2 giant hits in one great pack. He got Command and Conquer free with Civilization 2. What a game to get free. Command and Conquer. Amazing. Loads more of answers in there. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. And that leads us on to our question of the week for this week. Oh, one more. Tech Made Easy. He says, I don't know if this truly counts as bundled, but it blew my mind when I realised I could put the Quake CD-ROM in our hi-fi and listen to the soundtrack. I forgot that was a thing. Question of the week for this week, and I said that Acclaim's back catalogue was a bit ropey. I said it was mixed, but I want you to tell me why I'm wrong. I want you to tell me your favourite game from Acclaim's back catalogue and why it's your favourite. Where can people do that, Neil?
Oh, they can go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Bookmark it, make it your homepage, print it out and stick it on your fridge every week for all of your retro news.
And that's it. We're done.
That's the end of the show. Time to get our waving hands ready. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen and to watch. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
He's waving.
I'm waving. Both hands.
Oh. Will we get the ghostly hand of Duncan again this week?
Ooh.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from the Retro Collective and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.